So last time we did the eraser tool. Anyone have any questions on that? Pretty self-explanatory. Next, we're doing the gradient tool. So the first thing we need to do is make a selection. So we'll go down to our template layer, the background copy, get our magic wand, make a selection or two. All right, I'm hearing lots of talking going on, and I shouldn't be. Okay. Gradient tool simply creates, it fills in two or more colors and kind of shows a transition from one to the other. And it follows the direction in which you drag. So if I drag, and it's based on your, your foreground and background colors. So if I drag up to down, it's going to go foreground to background. If I drag down to up, it's going to do the opposite. If I do it diagonally, it will do it diagonally. If I have more than one selection at a time, it's going to read these different selections as one big thing. So that's why, like, if I do the gradient tool like this, it's not going to display the transition part of the gradient because it's being masked out. So just keep that in mind. Okay, you can also drag past the edges of the selection. And, the longer you drag, the more gradual the transition. The shorter you drag, the more it's just going to look like a half and half kind of a thing. So if you want to get a nice smooth gradient, you'll want to, drag it pretty far. All right, now bundled with the gradient tool is the paint bucket. And this is basically just a way of filling without going to edit fill. If I click inside the selection, it'll automatically fill every selection with that color. In this case, the foreground color. So just one click and it'll instantly fill it. So that can save you a little time potentially. All right, so that's the paint bucket and the gradient tool. Next, we've got blur, sharpen, and smudge. And yes, those all do what they sound like they do. All right, let's take a look at this image really quick. If I get the blur tool and just start clicking, you can see really quick that it just blurs whatever you're clicking on. So if you have some kind of a special effect and you want to do a slight blurring thing and you don't want to go up to filter for your blur, you can just use the tool. Not really. It won't despeckle. You're thinking of probably like under filter and noise, there's a despeckle tool that will make it look less, less compressed. No, it just makes things look blurry. All right. The sharpen tool does the opposite. You click on it and it just sharpens. Like now it's sharpening it so much it's actually overexposing the pixels, but you see how that works. So if you have a part of your image that's a little blurry, you just click a little bit with the sharpen tool and it'll do it to a degree. It's not a cure-all, but it'll work it to a certain extent. The smudge tool is just like finger painting. You just, you know. Right now, the strength is set at 17, or no, it's 11, which isn't very strong. If I bring this up to 100, it's like, yeah. Right? Yeah, it's just like finger painting. It's so if you want to make your thing look like a big mess of wet paint. Well, actually, in fashion photography, they do use this tool a lot. They'll actually very slightly um, bring it in, and they'll actually on the edges of people's faces make them look a little bit thinner. Just move it in slightly and smudge it just a little bit, and it'll actually you can change the contours of the way people's bodies are shaped. Just like they use the clone stamp to get rid of people's blemishes and stuff. Okay, so that is blur, sharpen, and smudge. The dodge and burn tools, dodge makes an area look lighter. So if I have an area that looks a little too dark and I want to lighten it, hit dodge. Yep. All right. Burn does the opposite. Burn makes things darker. So if you have an area that's a little light or overexposed, and I don't know that you would ever use this on your box itself, but you might bring in an image from somewhere that needs a little touch up, and that's what you would use this for. Not that bad. Finally, the sponge tool will either saturate or desaturate an area depending on what it's set at. So when it saturates an area, that means it's making the color more vibrant. Desaturate means it's taking the color out of it. So you see right there how it's making things look more gray and washed out, taking the color out of it. If you set it to saturate, of course, that means it'll make it brighter. See how much more intense it's looking? All right. The pen tool. The pen tool is a way to create something called a path. A path is a vector-based um, element in Photoshop. Vectors are based on mathematical algorithms, so they don't rely on resolution. All right. If something is made with a vector, it will look just as good if it's printed small on a business card as it would really huge on a billboard or something. Okay. So there are advantages to using vectors. The problem, though, with vectors is that they're kind of complicated. So we're not really doing much with them because there is a, no pun intended, learning curve when you use them. But it's still important that you know what they are and how they work. So with the pen tool, I can create a series of points that are connected by lines. If I hold down the mouse, the left mouse button, as I click, it's going to curve the line like so. If I go back to where I began, it's going to close that path. Now I can either right click on this and fill the path with a color. Let's do background color this time. Okay. I can stroke along this path. The other cool thing I can do, all right, I can add points, I can take points away. But I can also take the text tool, click on the path. Let me switch to a color that'll show up better. And I can type along the path. Of course, it's just nonsense, but you get the idea. All right. So, speaking of the text tool, let's talk about that, because that's going to be something that you're going to use a lot of. All right. The text tool is right here. It looks like the letter T. All right, and basically what you do is anytime you click with the text tool, you're going to create a new layer automatically. Now, what I would suggest is instead of just clicking, click and drag like this, and you'll create a text field. Now, whatever you type, all right? Now, if you look up here at the top of the screen for the options, you'll see here is your list of fonts. As you can see, there's a lot of them that come with Photoshop. You can also add your own, like some of these I've bought and installed myself. Some of them I've just found online. Yeah, you got to be careful. Some of those sites give you viruses if you're not careful. All right. So for my box, if I'm doing something Batman related, comic book related, I'll probably want to pick some kind of a font that replicates comic style.
Perhaps Comic Sans.
Never Comic Sans.
So funny.
All right. So the thing about fonts is you got to think about what's appropriate and what's legible. All right. Yes, there's lots of different types of fonts, but some of them just aren't really appropriate. Like, I'm not going to choose something like, Charlemagne Bold if I'm doing a box, You know, like let's say I'm doing SpongeBob SquarePants. I don't think that SpongeBob, something about this font doesn't scream SpongeBob to me. Right? It's too formal.
Yes, you can, Sean.
Right? So the thing about typography, which we haven't really gotten much into yet, but it's a really essential part of good design, you've got to think about font style. All right? Don't pick something that is totally inappropriate. Try to make it legible but also relate. Okay, so up here you have your font, your type of font. You've got your font size right here. You can click on that and whatever, you know, there's some preset ones, or you can type in manually a different size. You can choose your style here, italic, regular, whatever.
Whatever does not look like a listed size.
No, it's not a listed size. Here's your text alignment. So if I want all of this text aligned in the center, I pick the center button. Here's the font color. If I want to adjust any of this, I can select it and change it. So right now this is all yellow. If I want to make it different, I can either do it here or I can do it over here in my swatches. So now it's black. I can also warp the text. This is the warp text button right here. If I change the style to, say, wave, I can use these sliders to adjust. There's horizontal and vertical distortion. Again, you don't want to do anything too crazy because it'll affect the readability. Or we could do inflate.
Wait, could you use that if you were like trying to make it look like it was going around like a air balloon?
Yeah, potentially.
Like then would you want to use it?
What? Right. So, okay, Gabby has a question that's kind of relevant. Sometimes you're going to bring in an image, and it's not going to let you do certain things with it because of the mode of the image. So up here, go to Image, see Mode. Well, it's not letting me select it at the moment. Hold on. Let me get out of this text thing. All right, Image, Mode. Change it from indexed to RGB color. Yeah. So whenever that happens, folks, go to Image and Mode and check it. And if it's not RGB color, change it to RGB color, and it should let you do whatever you need to do. All right, so basically, in a nutshell, that's the text tool. The only other thing to say about the text tool is that you can also add effects to the text.